Welcome to the Week in Nintendo at GVG. I'm Brandon Miracle, and today I'm joined by Steve Bowling to talk about Nintendo. Of course, that's why you're here.
What?
Are you surprised? Well, you should be, because Steve's wearing a PlayStation shirt for some
I
reason.
I am. I'm so not dressed for the occasion.
I noticed it when you first turned your camera on, and I was like, well, that's wrong. So you're fired. So
No.
goodbye, Steve. This is just Brandon's show now. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, it's been an interesting week in Nintendo. The Switch 2 storm has kind of blown over. So the stories are fairly limited, but there is one big one, I guess you could say, that's pretty funny. Nintendo Switch 2 preview events, they finally did the drawing for all of those, right? And GVG, holistically, none of us got in.
Yeah, like all of us applied and none of us got in. And we applied for multiple events. I personally applied for both New York and LA, and I didn't get into either of those.
Yeah, it was funny, like on Bluesky that day, just watching like the collective meltdown of like all of our colleagues and fellow content creators that just didn't get in.
Yeah, it's so funny to me because I was thinking one of the things, I don't like to think that as an industry where we're so much in competition with each other. But there is that whiff of jealousy that you get when someone else, like in the same field as you, in this case, content creation, gets something that you don't, right? Like there's that whiff of like, dang, man, they made it and I didn't. We all, like as an industry, took the L at the same time, except for Roger Space. Like he's the only one that got in.
Good old Roger Space. It's so funny too, because he's a Nintendo ambassador, and I know other Nintendo ambassadors that didn't make it. But,
yeah, it was very funny to see. And to be clear, I'm not throwing any shade on Roger Space. He's a friend of the channel and a really great guy to boot.
Oh, yeah.
Love him. But it couldn't have, honestly, like, if anybody had to get in, I'm happy it was him. But it was very funny. Like every single person in our circle, like, of Nintendo content creators was posting how we didn't get in, how everybody lost. Freaking Jeff Keighley didn't get in. And then just Roger, like the sole shining light of all of us, was like, yeah, I made it. He literally found the One Piece.
I the One Piece is real. I saw a video upload from Beat 'em Ups Wood that says he got in. I don't know if he's just joking or trolling or what, because he likes to do that. But if Wood got in, I guess that's appropriate too. But it is funny considering like the whole fiasco with the brand ambassador program when he got kicked out. So it's kind of poetic that if the video is true, that he's making his way to the Switch 2 preview event.
Yeah, it's really funny because I've also seen lots of I've seen people posting their tickets, like trying to scalp tickets to the preview event for thousands of dollars, which is just objectively hilarious.
They are non-transferable.
Yeah, they aren't. I wonder though, like, I wonder how that'll work. I don't remember how the Switch 2017 preview went. Like in January 2017, they did something very similar, but the tickets were drawn in a very different fashion. And admittedly, I didn't go, so I just didn't. I don't know how that went because I was just like, yeah, I'm not going to go.
I got in via so like they had done all the tickets. I think the tickets were just register, and if you were there in time, you got in. I could be misremembering.
It sounds right. I know they didn't do a lottery, that's for sure. I would have remembered that.
They had one in Chicago, which I'm pretty close to. And I remember I was at work at the time, just goofing off on social media because, I used to work in a TV station, and when news wasn't happening, I had nothing to do. So, goof off on Facebook for however long. And I was just scrolling, and the moment a post went up from Nintendo, I was there the moment it went up that they were giving out, I think, 500 tickets for X amount of times for Chicago specifically. And like I said, I was there when as soon as it went up. So I just grabbed the max amount that they let me take and I got in like it was nothing.
That is really cool.
Yeah, it was a fun experience for me because back then I wasn't doing this kind of stuff for work. For me, that was just, oh, cool. I am little YouTube break room arcade man getting to go play Switch early. Honestly, doing that is kind of what kickstarted me to try and take this stuff more seriously from a career perspective. But I remember that experience being very fun. And I do wonder if they'll do like another social media drop for like extra times. I know they have a wait list and whatnot. But that's first come, first serve.
Yeah, it's a good question because I figure that there's a huge difference this time around. In 2017, Nintendo was coming off the fortunes they had built for themselves with the Wii U, right? Not a lot of people were paying attention to Nintendo. There was a lot of skepticism that the Switch would be popular, even among developers and publishers. There were a lot of people taking a wait and see approach. And in this case, we're going into this knowing that the Switch ended up being white hot. Like everybody loved it. At the time of this recording, second best selling platform of all time. So a successor to that is going to attract a lot more eyeballs than a successor to the Wii U. And I think that Nintendo is likely, there's way more demand this time. Like you're talking about a pool of 150 plus million people who own this current iteration and may want to just see what the next one is all about. And a lot of those people are going to live in those big metropolitan areas that they're doing this. So I don't know that they're going to, I think they would want to, but I don't know that they're going to be able to open more slots because that wait list is probably already going to be huge. I can count on one hand the number of people I saw that actually got in. So, I mean, I'll be on the wait list. I know you'll be on the wait list. I know everyone from GVG will be on the wait list. So I just don't know that they'll have enough. I don't know that they'll get through the wait list enough to open additional slots.
It's interesting though, like the wait list. Have you signed up on the wait list yet?
I haven't. I need to.
So I did. I was about an hour late because I forgot what time it was popping up. But then I remembered, so I went to the website. And when you sign up for the wait list, you just get to click. There's a little checkbox that says every time. Get put on the wait list for every single time. So they let you sign up for every single available appointment.
Oh, wow.
So I think they are accounting for that by not like limiting it. I think it's still going to cap out and there are going to be tons and tons of people who don't get to go in. But I thought that was an interesting approach. Being on the wait list too mitigates people who would be flying out because I assume you wouldn't know if you could get in until literally the time comes.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought. I mean, and to be fair, in the initial messaging, they did say that these were open to like local people only. And I think there's people like you and me who are like, well, I'm not local, but I will make it happen. I don't know that I could make it happen if they messaged me the day before or something, to say like, hey, we have a slot for you. I'm not buying a next day ticket across the country to go try the Switch 2 for I don't even know how long, maybe like a couple hours or something.
I think it's 2.5 hours is the length.
Yeah, but you also have to imagine that there's not like a Switch 2 demo station for every person that's in the room at the time. Like you're probably still queuing up and waiting for a chance to play. I know that in 2017, it was very much like that. When I went to the media Switch event, even then it was like there were more people than there were consoles to play. So I'd just kind of filter through and play what I could play. Like I think they had, and the media event was very similar to the public event. Like it literally was in the same place, at least again in 2017 when I did that. There was like 6 stations with Breath of the Wild. There was like an experience with everybody one, or not everybody, just 1-2 Switch. There was, Puyo Puyo Tetris. There was stuff like that, Fast RMX, Disgaea 5, like a lot of the early games that were coming to the Switch, ARMS, Mario Kart. But you still had to queue up and wait for your opportunity to play those. It was just a smaller group, so you got through the queues faster. When they let the public in, those queues were way bigger. And so, think like baby E3 really, for 2017. Like you lined up to play those games, but it was like 20 minutes instead of 4.5 hours to get to the front of the line.
Yeah, it was like that for me at the Chicago experience. And I think also they had a more limited number of people because it was a social media drop instead of just a regular sign up. I don't remember having to really wait for anything for that entire experience. I assume they did this at all the events, but for Breath of the Wild specifically, you just walked up and they gave you a time slot and you came back to it later.
Oh, okay. That's definitely, and again, with a media experience, it's going to be different, but
yeah,
I think that, that makes sense. Like you just reserve a time to go play, because Breath of the Wild, at least the demo, which again, I imagine is the same demo you played, was like, I want to say 15 minutes or something. Like you were given like hey, you can explore around, you can run, you can look at stuff, and you've got X number of minutes to just do what you like. And
that was it.
Yeah, I ended up just fighting a stone talus. And I was like, oh boy, I'm not ready for this.
I was doing jump attacks, and the attendant at my station was like, you don't have to just do jump attacks. And I'm like, shut up, I'm Miyamoto, I'm climbing trees. I didn't say that, but it was funny.
Yeah, for mine, they literally guided me. They were like, hey, you want to get killed? And I was like, all right.
Yeah.
They're like, go that way. And they're like, they didn't tell me what was coming. And I saw that talus and I was like, oh yeah, I am going to die.
Going back to the tickets not being transferable, I think this time it's done through the My Nintendo app. Cause like you'll get it's the Warp Pipe Pass, right? Like you get a QR code that you have to scan.
Yeah.
And I guess you could just give someone your login, but I feel like it's not quite that easy this time.
It's a good question. I wonder, because if it's anything like, and going back again in 2017, the crowds were huge, and I imagine they'll be even bigger this time. I don't know how you would like check IDs or validate beyond that. I mean, I know personally, Nintendo uses that, and it's a really smart system. The My Nintendo QR thing where you check in, they use that at shows a lot, like PAX and everything like that, if they have free stuff to give away. So they can be like, oh, hey, we already gave you this. You can't get it again, to prevent people from running up and grabbing like just a fistful of Zelda pins or whatever and then selling them. Usually it's like, hey, you can do this once a day. You can come back to us, check in, and we'll give you something neat. So, but if you realistically, say sent a screenshot of your QR code to a friend, they could just scan it and get their thing. So I'm betting that's what some of these scalpers are banking on, but I also wouldn't necessarily be surprised if Nintendo was like, hey, I need to see you open the app and actually pull up the code instead of just showing it to me on the screen.
When they were doing the Best Buy tour for Smash Ultimate, they had stuff that they were giving away, and that's what they did. They made you open the app on your phone. Like you had to show them the QR code in your app for them to scan it.
Yeah, and I think that's fair, because obviously I don't believe in any of this nonsense of scalping tickets to events like this. I don't believe in really, scalping just sucks. It takes away fun things from enthusiasts, and so I just feel like it would be I'm good on Nintendo if they actually make you show that you have the app instead of just showing like a screenshot, right? I think that's good on them for just being like, yeah, you need to actually prove to me that you're capable of signing into that account. So I hope that ends up being the case, that they try to head off people who are disingenuous about how they're getting in. Like if you buy that ticket for $1,000 on eBay, I hope that they actually make you verify you have that account.
I'm sure too, like there's probably some protections on eBay's side in that case, because they're very likely not able to deliver on what they're saying they're selling you.
Yeah. It's I can't help but imagine that somebody like, frankly, like us, is going to pay that money, like a YouTuber or somebody who hopes to make some financial gain from going to the event. And I think it's a scummy practice overall. Like, I hope that eBay doesn't allow those things to go on. But I mean, if history is any indicator, eBay is like a scalper's paradise. So I hope that they do something, but I'm also not going to hold my breath. I think instead, Nintendo will likely be the ones to be like, hey, that doesn't look like it's your account. Can you open the app and prove that you have this? Which, I mean, there's a lot to speculate on there, but it's crazy to me to just see that Switch 2 hype is so high that people are willing to, that people think they can get $1,000 for a ticket to just play the thing for a limited amount of time.
Yeah, it's absolutely crazy. I'm not surprised people are trying to do that, but it is nice to know that there's still some anticipation for the new system. Despite so much the narrative that I've seen of people being like, oh, Nintendo's being safe and all that stuff. They gave us what we asked for, which was a better Switch.
I find
that's really all I wanted.
Right. I find the narrative very interesting about Nintendo playing it safe because we discussed this a little bit in previous episodes, but what did people, the people who are asking for Nintendo to do something crazy and out of left field, one, there's still the chance for that. We don't know a lot about this hardware. We don't know what resolutions it outputs at. We don't know what games are on it, save for Mario Kart 9. We don't know, anything about the hardware's capabilities. Officially, we don't even know what type of media it uses. We don't know what, if Switch 2 game cards are any different. We don't know if it takes anything different from micro SD that's in the current Switch. Like, officially, we don't have answers to loads of questions about the console currently. We don't even know if it's an IPS LCD or an OLED panel in there. Like, rumors have filled in a lot of these gaps, but officially there's very little info on the ground. And I would argue that the rumored mouse functionality for the Joy-Con is absolutely not playing it safe. It's a cool, interesting new twist. Like, I find that alone to be incredibly exciting. And I think but you have to also accept that if you want Nintendo to continue down the line of making hybrid consoles, you have also limited the things that they can do with new hardware in terms of innovative features. Like, if you still want this form factor, you have to accept that there's only so much they can do to change that without fundamentally changing what it is.
I vastly prefer the approach with Nintendo Switch than I do with previous generations because, you look at Nintendo Labo or the Ring Con with Ring Fit. I like that better, where I can buy a peripheral that does Nintendo weird, so that the console itself is not pigeonholed into just being whatever the quote unquote gimmick is. Like, everyone tried to, or Nintendo really tried to make the Wii U gamepad interesting, and it just didn't work out. And because of that, now they have an entire console whose entire gimmick just didn't really make much sense. But with Switch, they can just, they have a bunch of features that are on the console that are not, they don't make or break the system. Its whole identity is not based on that. It's a hybrid console. That's its identity. These other things are just, candy, cake, extras. But now, like, I can buy a peripheral, I can slap a Joy-Con into it, and now I have a weird new Nintendo thing that I can play with.
Yeah, and it's also worth mentioning that there's a preservationist angle to all of this. Like, if Nintendo does something really, really out of left field, like the Wii U, like you mentioned, those games are harder to replicate with, traditional hardware, right? Like, I don't have a wireless screen-enabled joypad controller. I don't know why I said joypad. That's terrible. But for a PC, that's going to be hard to, 50 years from now, if the kids of that generation want to know what the Wii U was like, it's going to be incredibly difficult for them to replicate the experience. The same could be said of the DS, even though now these days there are dual screen handhelds that are being made that can emulate DS pretty well. uh, the Switch having kind of like the output methods of it being more in line with standard consoles, and the creative aspect of it being that, it's just this portable form factor that you can take anywhere, means that, again, 50 years from now, when they've moved on from this concept potentially, it'll be easier for new generations to experience Switch 1 and 2 games without Nintendo having to create, some crazy supplemental piece of hardware to make those experiences possible. So I appreciate it from that respect as well. And I think that it's just, I don't know what I would want more than a more capable version of one of my favorite consoles of all time.
Even with like mouse mode, if we focus on that for a bit, like, when we first heard mouse mode, like, we were thinking about all the ways it can replace input methods for games that already exist. Like, mouse mode does not make or break the console, but it does give us an option. And that option just fulfills control methods that we have adjacents for on Switch, like gyro, or slowly moving the cursor on the screen to something that you want to interact with. Mouse mode is weird because no one ever thinks about using a mouse on a console, but it's already an established thing in gaming. So I think it's that much more exciting and easy to adapt, and, like you said, easy to return to in the future.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept, and like you said, it's something that also, again, from a preservationist aspect, enables us to relive experiences that we've had on consoles that are no longer in production. Right? We touched on the idea that DS and 3DS games would be much more easily accessible with a mouse to replace the touch input. Because right now, if you've ever played a DS port on the current Switch, it is not nearly as good. Like, it is hard to replicate that. Sushi Striker is a perfect example of a game that was designed for an input method that you can't replicate in docked mode, right? Like, right now, playing Sushi Striker in docked mode on the Switch is not a very fun experience. Like, it's lesser than its DS counterpart because you need that touch input to make it worthwhile. So really, it's a handheld mode and a DS game. And I think that mouse mode would give us the ability to, I would not want to play a game like, for instance, what's it called? Feel the Magic XXYY from the DS the current version of the Switch. Would not want to play that at all. But if I had a mouse input to use, I think I'd fall in love with that game all over again. So I think that there's some interesting stuff to do here with a potential new twist like that. And I also think that, say what you will about creativity and all the, gimmicks and all this stuff, but I think it would add an interesting new element to Switch 2 titles.
I mean, even going back to the preservationist angle, like, there's the SNES and mouse, and now we'll be able to play those games as intended if they then come to Nintendo Switch Online. There can be older games, older ports from PC. We've got that Roller Coaster Tycoon port that just added touch controls in an update. What's to stop us from using mouse mode once that comes out? And now you have an authentic way to play that game on a console. There's just a lot of potential here. It opens so many doors for old and new. And I think that's one of the best calls Nintendo could have made.
Absolutely. And one of the things that, to back off from the idea of a new hardware gimmick altogether, if you just, you said it earlier, and I just want to echo what you're saying. If you just told me that the Switch 2 was everything that the Switch is, just better, I'd still be happy with just that. I don't know that Nintendo necessarily needs to. I think innovation for innovation's sake doesn't serve anyone well, and I think in some ways that was what the Wii U was. They wanted a new thing that would draw eyeballs, and they picked the wrong thing. People just weren't sold on the wireless tablet. I thought it was neat. I still love my Wii U, but clearly it didn't have that mass market appeal that the Switch does. And I think that it's important to remember that, you look at PlayStation, right? They do cool stuff, but they're not trying to rock the boat too much generation to generation, and they're doing just fine. Same for Xbox. Well, Xbox may not be doing just fine. They just announced 29% decline in hardware sales, but
Xbox is doing.
Yeah, Xbox is doing things. I don't know how those things rate, but we're at a point where we also need to accept that even if you want something out of left field from Nintendo, and I get it, that's exciting, it doesn't always work out. And I think that this is, we found something that really works with the Switch. And if I were a business like Nintendo, I wouldn't necessarily want to throw all that out just to create something entirely different when it's very clear that your consumers are saying that they like this thing you've made and they want more of the same.
Yeah. And the Nintendo Switch is already a huge amalgamation of most of Nintendo's innovations that they've done in the past. Touchscreen is there, motion controls are there. We're going back to mouse controls. Yay for Super Nintendo. Yeah, so I guess I don't really see what people are getting at. And I also wonder, too, if a lot of those folks might be young, where the only new consoles they've experienced from Nintendo are the Wii, the Wii U, and the Switch. 3 vastly different machines. Because if you look before that, like the NES to the Super NES, there's no gimmick. It's just a better console. You could almost say the same thing from Super Nintendo to N64, despite the jump to 3D graphics. That's what your quote unquote gimmick is, and there's 4 controller ports. But then N64 to GameCube, what's the gimmick? It's square? No, it's just a better console.
Yeah, and Nintendo has historically, like you said, the majority of their consoles have been improvements in the technical sense, not innovation. And there was a very clear demarcation line historically with Nintendo when they said that they were pursuing their blue ocean strategy, which is what they espoused about during the Wii era. They said, and it was their way of saying, like, we're not chasing power, we're chasing fun. This is what we want to do. We're more interested in bringing concepts to market that expand the gaming audience as opposed to fighting Microsoft and Sony in terms of raw horsepower and specs, because it's in a zero-sum game. We're not going to win on just specs alone. We need to do interesting things. And to some end, they're still playing that game, right? Like, obviously the Switch 2, when it drops, will not be anywhere near as powerful as the PS5 or the Xbox Series X. Like, if you think that, you're setting yourself up for disappointment.
Yeah.
This is going to be a console that still focuses on fun first, delivering experiences that people really enjoy, as opposed to, stuff that you can ogle. And that's not to say that the Switch 2 won't have impressive games, but they'll be impressive because of the hardware they're on, not when you put them right up against whatever the best looking game on PS5 is.
Yeah, having all of Nintendo's innovation or past innovations available on one platform just to me says they're doubling down on that philosophy. They're really not changing their strategy here at all. And if you look at the handheld side of their past consoles, like almost all of them are just iterations of the previous thing. Like you have the Game Boy Color, Game Boy Pocket, Game Boy Light, Game Boy Advance SP, so on and so forth, DS Lite. Clearly this works, and that's why they're doing it.
Yeah, and it's interesting to bring that to take that further. There's been an argument made that the Switch is just a continuation of the philosophy they were building with the Wii U. The Wii U had this wireless gamepad where you could play your games entirely on that in many cases. And with the Switch, they just crammed all the power of the Wii U into just a tablet that you could take with you and didn't need a console. You could argue that the Switch is the realization of what they maybe wanted to do in the Wii U era, but the technology just wasn't there yet. Because, on paper, the Switch is likely, and honestly, I couldn't answer this accurately without looking at the specs, but the Switch is likely marginally more powerful than the Wii U. I don't think by a whole lot, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, like Mario Kart 8 ran at 720 59 FPS on Wii U, and it's 1080 60 on Switch. but I mean, it ran Breath of the Wild, and so does Switch. And as far as I know, there's no performance differentials between them, if any.
Yeah, I think that Wii U might load a bit slower, but like again, what is the issue there, right? I didn't play through a lot of Breath of the Wild on the Wii U for obvious reasons. I was busy playing it elsewhere. Um, but the point is, Nintendo has been playing this really brilliant long game. Since the Wii, they've been opting not to compete on specs, but that has enabled them to make this portable device that has still iteratively better than what had come before. Like the transition from Wii U to Switch is honestly brilliant and should be studied, because they basically were able to put something out that ran games at least better, in some respects than their previous full-size console, and they did so by intentionally holding themselves back technologically for years, while Sony and Microsoft just pushed ahead with the same ideology. And Nintendo has just kind of slowly swooped in and started to deliver more and more impressive stuff in a form factor that kind of underlines how impressive the tech is in these things. Like even non-technical people can look at a Switch and be like, holy hell, it runs this game. Like that's crazy. You don't need to be a technical person to understand that Mario Kart looking as good as it does on a console the size of the Switch is just crazy. And I think that that's something that Nintendo has done really well to position themselves. Like they don't really have to communicate a whole lot about the technical aspects of their hardware anymore, because you just look at this tiny thing running these beautiful games and you're like, I get it. That makes sense.
Yeah, I remember my experience sitting down at the Switch preview event with Mario Kart specifically. They had Mario Kart only available in handheld mode at like this recreation of an airplane that you would sit down at and play it in tabletop mode. And I remember sitting there and starting to play a game that I already knew and just being like, I can't believe I'm doing this right now. I am playing this console experience from the console I have at home right now on this little tablet.
Yeah, it had the exact effect that Nintendo wanted it to, that it just sold you on the fact that they somehow took this, and if you don't have a Wii U, it's big. Like it's a big console. It's a thick boy. Like it's very long. You could fit probably, no joke, 4 or 5 Switches inside the shell of the Wii U.
You could fit multiple Switches probably into the gamepad.
Yeah. And it's just this impressive feat that something that, you need that big piece of hardware to runs better on this tiny tablet. Nintendo has really done something here that honestly has changed the way the industry looks altogether. And that's a big thing. So, this is a very long roundabout way of just saying, I don't know that, Switch 2 necessarily needed an extra gimmick. I'm very confident that it has one in the form of the mouse mode. But I think if you had just said, yeah, this thing that we already did that is still very impressive 8 years on is just getting a much better, more capable version, I think that's going to be more than enough for the vast majority of people who own Switches today.
I mean, you just look at the rest of the industry. They're now chasing what Nintendo did with Switch. You've got several handheld PCs on the market. Valve got into the game with the Steam Deck and is doing very well with that. There's rumors now that PlayStation's going to do that, and Xbox too, because of course they are. People give Nintendo a lot of flack for not putting their focus into power, but they've never been wrong. They've never been wrong about that. It's also especially like worth noting in the current times where we have all these AAA studios and they can't survive. Like they're falling apart because the budgets for these games are too high. The industry is trying to move faster. It is outgrowing itself. And people are suffering because of that. And yet Nintendo's over here making this little bite-sized WarioWare and making money on it, and the game's good and it's fun. And their developers stay safe. Like, you got to give them some credit. They're kind of leading the charge on a change that the industry needs right now.
Yeah, it's important to note that there's, like you said, the industry is kind of in a more fragile state than it's been, which is funny considering games are bigger and more beautiful than ever. But it is the fact that they're bigger and more beautiful that is causing that exact fragility. It's, to make these games, to make these experiences as wonderful as they are, and I love them. Spider-Man 2 just came out on PC. I'm playing it. I love it. Just as much as I did on PS5, but that game came at an enormous cost. And it's worth noting that very few publishers, even the likes of Sony, Microsoft, you name it, struggle with the current demands of the AAA gaming space. We just saw layoffs at BioWare this week. Like, I think it was yesterday. So it's nobody's safe. Whether you have whether you're a small indie dev or whether you literally have billions of dollars in funding, there's just this sense that AAA game development in its current form is not sustainable. And Nintendo has been really smart to position themselves in such a way that they don't necessarily need AAA money, right? Like Breath of the Wild likely didn't cost nearly as much as Spider-Man 2 or Final Fantasy 16. Because it's the hardware that it's being designed for is much less demanding, and the tools to create games that run at 1080p in today's day and age are much less. They're much cheaper. It requires a lower time investment and a lower technical investment. So the other thing that Nintendo has done is always prioritizing keeping their talent. Like John did a video a couple years ago, I want to say, on Nintendo and how they avoid layoffs. It's definitely worth a watch. If you haven't seen it before, check that one out. It outlines kind of how the laws are structured in Japan to prevent workers from, being laid off without good cause. And so I think that Nintendo has, and Nintendo has publicly stated that they're focus on keeping their talent because you can't make good games without happy people. And so I think that it's really smart that Nintendo has prioritized keeping people on board even when maybe times are tight.
We should also be clear, we are, this is in no way defending a corporation. We don't know what happens behind closed doors. Things could be bad that we're not aware of in some areas. And we would certainly never defend that. But, clearly they are doing something different. And that should be worth noting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not going to say that everything is fine. I have no clue. I don't have any visibility into Nintendo and what they do. But as an outward observer, an outside observer, looking at, just kind of the state of the industry, and the fact that, the folks at Nintendo are still doing what they're doing, I have to at least give them some respect for the fact that, you don't really hear about much of the tumultuous nature of the industry spilling over into what Nintendo is up to.
Yeah, I hope our assumptions are correct.
Yeah, me too.
But, the way things are moving in the industry right now, it's hard not to think they are. So yeah, I think Nintendo is on the right path. I think Switch 2, I don't think it'll be nearly the success that the Switch 1 was, but it doesn't have to be. Like, people who think they're going to stop making Switch 1 games anytime soon are delusional.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I think it's too early to call how successful Nintendo will be with the Switch 2. I do wonder, because a sequel to anything usually doesn't do as well. But I also think that it's all down to how Nintendo markets this. We've seen only the very first baby step of Nintendo introducing their new console. Mm-hmm. And, they led very strong with the original Switch, but I also think that they very much needed to, because they were on their back foot going into that. Nintendo was up against a wall with the Wii U. They had made some critical errors there.
Yeah, and I think some people are also forgetting how long we knew about the NX leading to the reveal of Nintendo Switch. Like, they got ahead of that as soon as they could. They didn't have to do that this time. That's why, the hype and the stress I saw on like on the Switch 2 subreddit of people like melting down because Nintendo hasn't revealed their system yet. They didn't have to. They just didn't have to.
It's something that we've talked about at length in other videos here on the channel, but Nintendo was in a very strong position this time around. Like they were making, whether we felt it was time or not, they were still making and still are making plenty of money on the current iteration of the Switch. They didn't need to tell us anything because people were still buying.
They're still selling Mario Kart 8. There's a new
price.
Mario Kart coming, and they're still going to sell Mario Kart 8. That's still going to be on sales charts. I guarantee it.
Yeah, it's not going anywhere. And I think that, as the Switch 2 comes to market, the Switch 1 will become the device that is handed down to kids in the family, given to others. Like all those Switches that are currently out there are going to end up in the hands of other people. Like my Switch will likely become one of my kids' Switches as soon as I get my Switch 2, because I don't envision a world in which I'm going to be like, I need to keep my OG Switch around to play stuff. Like my PS5 completely supplanted my PS4. I just didn't need to have a PS4 hooked up anymore because my PS5 can play almost every single game that I own for my PS4. And the few that don't work, I'm not rushing to go back to right now. In the future, that might change, but and I imagine the same will be true of the Switch. Like 95% of the games I want to play on my Switch 2 or on my Switch 1 will be just natively playable on the Switch 2. So I don't know that I'm going to need to like keep my Switch 1 in my bag. I just can't imagine a world where there's like even one game where I'm like, I have to have access to this and it doesn't work.
Yeah, I was telling Michaela that I'm probably just going to trade in my Switch OLED when the new one comes out because I'm not going to need it anymore. I'm not really a collector. I've talked about this at length. My collector spirit was ruined many years ago when I had to offload most of it. I do have a Tears of the Kingdom Special Edition, and that does mean a lot to me. But if I can save money on buying a Switch 2, then I'm going to do that because it's going to play all the games I want to play anyway.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. It makes a lot of sense to me. I think we're rapidly approaching a world in which when you get a new console, there's not a ton of need to keep the old one. The same is true. Like if you look at Series X and PS5, they've already most everything works. They were designed to replace what you had before as opposed to be something entirely new. And I think the Switch 2 is going to continue that trend because platform holders have rightfully recognized that people want those libraries to keep working. Like you invest thousands into your gaming libraries on these platforms, and we're no longer in an era where you can just be like, yeah, none of those are good anymore. You need to start from zero again. People just won't accept that in a world where Steam exists.
Nintendo's got 2 separate Splatoon titles on Nintendo Switch right now that still both maintain their player bases. I think they would be stupid to throw that away.
That is one way of putting it. Yeah.
Why don't we dip into our mailbag here? We've got some questions from people in our winner's circle, and one that kind of drew my eye, and we haven't talked about this as much recently, but this one comes from Kirito. I've recently been reading about NVIDIA's latest technologies on family boards that were revealed at CES, and how, according to leaked information we currently have, these latest technologies in some capacities should be compatible with the Switch 2 due to it having a moderate enough NVIDIA chip powering it. DLSS 4 in particular is very exciting. I don't think there's any world that this has DLSS 4 on it. Thank you for the question, by the way. We have patents that Digital Foundry have gone over, and I kind of agree with them. They believe that NVIDIA has probably created a proprietary version of DLSS specifically for Switch 2 hardware to keep its thermals low, to keep its battery life longer, and things like that.
All right, I see where you're going now. I was going to disagree because DLSS 4 is all the way down to the 20 series. Like they've put it on all of their stuff. But I agree with you. So, if you're going back to the PlayStation world, PS5 Pro launched with its own kind of custom proprietary frame gen technology called PSSR, right? PlayStation
Super
spectral
spectral.
resolution, something like that. I
Yeah.
don't remember. Uh, and I could see Nintendo being easily Nvidia's biggest customer, having its own proprietary version of DLSS. Like you said, Brandon, thermals and battery life are certainly a massive concern. I also just don't think that the Switch 2 SoC, no matter what it is, will have the grunt to do multiple frame gen, multi-frame gen, which is a 50 series exclusive feature currently,
Yeah.
where NVIDIA is concerned. I think that what we will see is something that plays with, resolutions and different models to generate frames for sure. I think there's going to be some level of frame generation happening, but I think it will be mostly to smooth out inconsistent frame rates as opposed to just blasting things up to like 120 FPS. I think the focus from Nintendo, because they've seen this in their first party offerings, is going to be to utilize DLSS to get up to specific resolution targets so that we're not seeing as much variation in visual fidelity as we saw this generation. Like you look at Xenoblade Chronicles 2, there are spots where you can tell that the resolution gets noticeably low, in big open world segments.
Yeah.
Mario Odyssey even suffered from stuff like that, where you could see that the resolution would drop noticeably.
Hmm.
I think they're going to try to even those things out. I think they're going to also use this technology to remain at their target frame rate. Whether that's 30 or 60 will vary, but I think they're going to try to get more games to have more consistent frame pacing. I think it's going to be a very conservative implementation of DLSS.
Yeah, I agree. I think Nintendo, at least from a first party perspective, their goal is going to be to have their games running at 60 FPS. And whatever resolution it needs to do that is going to be what we get. I don't think there are going to be graphics options for games or first party Nintendo games. Nintendo is going to find a target and they're going to hit it. At least that's the way I see it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that this is more about consistent frame pacing, consistent resolution, eliminating some of the things that have become hallmarks of games that were taxing the Switch the way several of them did over the console's life cycle. I think this is just about giving people a smoother experience overall and not necessarily about boosting visual fidelity to heretofore unseen levels on Nintendo hardware. I think we'll get that as a natural consequence of having a chip that is, 8 whole years newer than what was in the Switch 1. There will definitely be a generational leap, but I think DLSS will be there just to provide consistency in both resolution and frame rate.
Yeah, I agree. We got another one here from Amagus that I think will resonate with you a little bit here, Steve. You've made a couple videos about Anime Life Sim, and we are now seeing a similar Nintendo knockoff game going viral for its blatantness in the form of Mario Strikers Soccer League.
Oh boy.
What do you think about this trend of blatant IP theft, and what do you think platforms and IP holders can or should do about it?
I think in cases like Anime Life Sim and Mario Strikers Soccer League, which we covered on the channel, I think, I'm not necessarily a big fan of Nintendo's litigious nature in some respects, but this is absolutely a case for the lawyers, right? Like the ninjas should be on these things, and I'm sure they will be. I think the interesting thing is, and to be clear, Nintendo is not exempt from this. There's multiple Wukong games on the Switch. There's
a Last of Us game.
Yeah, there was the Last of Us game. There's stuff like that. Frankly, I think industry-wide there needs to be a better review process for games that are submitted. Like a human looking at a game called Wukong Black Child Myth or whatever it was called is going to be like, wait, there's a very well-known game that is very similar to this, and this is risky. The Last of Us, if it had been reviewed by a human and not just a machine making sure that the software wasn't harmful, I think these things wouldn't have passed lot check or QA. And I understand that there's so many games being submitted that's difficult, but I also think you could potentially build a system that says, hey, this is very close to an existing IP from a competitor. We need a person to look at this.
Yeah, and I mean that's not even really covering the AI slop side of it, where these are just cash grabs using AI generated images. You went in great detail about the AI generation of Mario Strikers Soccer League. You have arms growing out of ears and triangles on soccer balls, and they were playing on a tablet for some reason.
Yeah, there was a lot to that game. I think the thing that I found the most troubling was, one, the description was very clearly ChatGPT generated, didn't even have the name of the game, instead like a block of text where they were supposed to put it and didn't. It was amazing to me that passed, but even frankly more amazing than that was that the game was literally unplayable. Like, you could not play it. It didn't work. And I was shocked that made its way all the way to being for sale. Like, I bought it thinking that it would be a horrible game, but I didn't think that I wouldn't be able to play it. Like, that is the very basics of what should be possible.
I'm less concerned overall with like the IP theft and whatnot as I am with just the consistent overuse of AI to just crap something out onto a store page. And obviously IP theft and copyright is a whole portion of why AI sucks. So I don't even think you need to look at it from the copyright perspective, because it's just all kind of roped in. Like, if I see an AI thumbnail on a store page, I'm probably going to dismiss your game outright. Like, I'm not even going to look at it.
Yeah,
I think you don't want that.
That is an absolutely fair point of view. Games are creative works, and knowing that somebody is out there just literally cutting the creativity out of the entire process is disheartening, to put it as mildly as I can. It upsets me because I think a big part of what makes games as a medium beautiful is the creativity of the people involved, right?
Yeah.
Breath of the Wild would be a great game regardless, but without its unique art style, which was certainly and obviously crafted by humans, it would not be quite the same. It would not be the great game that it is. I don't know that it'd be in my favorite games of all time without its unique aesthetic. And I find that to be, when I see AI slop like this, it's fun to point the finger and laugh, but it really is a big problem. And I wish that platform holders would implement something that would help detect games that were made using these processes and come down hard on them, because I think that it's disheartening to me knowing people who pour hours and months and years of their lives into creating beautiful games, to see that they're put alongside shit like this.
Yeah. I mean, Nintendo's made its stance on AI pretty clear, that it has no interest in using it to develop its games. And I feel like that should extend to the types of things you see on its own store page. I hope we see some of this moderation happen when the Switch 2 launches, but I'm not holding my breath.
No, me neither. I think it's an unfortunate fact of just being in the industry in 2025 that this stuff is going to happen. People, I think about the fact that there are so many games being made. Like, there are so many games out there. We talk about our favorite games on this channel, but they are an infinitesimally small fraction of the games that are being made available. Like, if you scroll through what is new on the eShop every day, it's more games than you can play in a lifetime. And most of them are really, really, really bad.
I have a feeling like a lot of these are just going to fall into obscurity, like the way how every time like a Disney animated movie comes out, there's some like cheap knockoff version released on DVD that's just horrible. Like, this is just an extension of that practice. And if history is anything to go by, it's not going to matter soon enough.
I agree that they're probably not going to be included in the pages of history of our medium, but I find these to be weirdly predatory in a way, because it's easy to think of, I'm in my 40s and I'm a parent and I'm well educated when it comes to games. So when my kids want a game, I know a lot about it. Usually by the time they even ask me for it, I've already heard of this game. I know what it's about. Um, and I certainly, if I don't, I know where to look to find out more about whatever they're asking me about. But I think that there are many, many more parents out there who will see their kids asking, "Oh, I want a Snow White and the Seven Dwarves game," and they go on the eShop and they see something like this, and they don't necessarily know that it was AI generated and maybe even an unplayable game, like a game that just literally doesn't work. And I feel bad for those parents who may unwittingly buy this stuff and not know that they're getting their kids something that is just designed to be unplayable or unbeatable, and it was just there to hoodwink people into throwing some money their way.
Yeah, it's a real shame. I hope the generation growing up right now where this is becoming a problem can see through it. Typically, this kind of stuff is targeted at older folks, like you said. So hopefully, they're connected enough that they can tell the difference. But I think we got time for one last question. And I think we've got one from Dead Alpha Lion. They asked this one on the Play Nation podcast. I don't know if you answered this one yet. Have you or do you regularly play any Nintendo games on the hardest difficulty setting? Partially asking this because of Donkey Kong Country Returns HD, which has an easy mode now, but I've always played DKC games on their hardest setting for the most challenge.
So I actually did delve into this topic at length on Play Nation, which is our Patreon exclusive PlayStation podcast. I'm recording that today, hence the shirt. So I will reserve, or I'll give an abridged version of my thoughts. But I don't think there's any right or wrong answer to difficulty. As somebody who works in games and tries to provide advice to others on what games they should or should not purchase, difficulty can be a very, pardon the overuse of the word, difficult question to answer. So my guidance on this is that as somebody who is meant to criticize games, who is meant to evaluate and provide critical feedback on games to people who may be trying to make a purchase decision, I do not play games on the hardest difficulty. I play the games on the difficulty the developer intends for most players to play. These days, particularly in PlayStation games, but in many other games as well, you'll often see the tag like "this is the intended experience" when selecting a difficulty. Like this is the one, this is the intended experience, and then you have either harder or easier difficulties that skew that experience in your preferred direction. So if I'm playing a game to review, I will, if there's a tag like that that's made available in the game, I will choose that difficulty because that's clearly the experience the developers want me, the player, to have. And of course, they give me options to customize it. If there is not, I will often try to reach out to those same developers and say, "Hey, like, what would you recommend I play this on? Do you recommend I play harder? Do you recommend I go easier? Is normal actually where you tuned the game for? Like, is that what you want me to go through?" And if they give me feedback, in any direction, I'll play whatever they intended to, because if I'm going to say a game's too hard or too easy, I want to make sure I've not skewed that in some way myself.
For me, I don't typically play on the hardest difficulty or the easiest. I'm probably more in line with you, where if there's an intended experience, then that's what I'll go with. It's a game by game basis, though. Like, I'm not playing every game that I want to play because I'm looking for a challenge. I'm usually not looking for a challenge when I'm playing a game. I'm just looking for a game to engage me. For some people, it is challenge that makes it engaging. I just spent 5 hours playing Hello Kitty last night, and I was engaged the whole time. Was it hard? No, but I was engaged. But, there are games where I do like a little bit more grit and difficulty and friction, like Monster Hunter. But I go to Monster Hunter for that specifically. So for the most part, it's just the intended experience that I'm looking for. Like, I'm going to play a game that's hard because it's hard. I'm not going to make a game hard that isn't. if it doesn't need to be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that, people derive entertainment in different ways.
Yeah.
And I think that for some people that is absolutely the thrill of surmounting an impossible challenge. And for some it's just life is hard enough and you just want something that relaxes you after a long day in the real world. So I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to the question, but yeah, you and I are in lockstep on this one. I will go to a game that's hard if I'm feeling like conquering something. But for the most part, I'm using games as a way to escape from what troubles me in real life.
I'm also the kind of person that tries to have a wide breadth of experiences with video games, and I feel like that needs to extend to difficulty too. Like, I go on and on about Outer Wilds all the time. I love that game. It has no difficulty settings, but I played it. I played it the way it was intended, and I loved it. I feel like if I spend more time trying to grind my way through a game by making it more difficult than, it needs to be, then I just have less time to spend experiencing other games too. And when you're in this position, specifically like in games media or whatever, like, you need to play a lot of stuff. I mean, we're only 6 people and we're not all fans of every type of genre, right? But for me, like I'm trying to cast a wide net because I've found that I've loved genres that I thought I'd hate before. I used to famously hate RPGs, and now I don't. So for me right now, it's most important to just play as much as I can. So difficulty usually isn't a concern.
Yeah, I think that that's a totally valid response. It is interesting to talk about, being in games media because a lot of times as soon as you're finishing a game, you're moving on to the next game everybody's talking about. And so oftentimes I'll find myself just trying to get through them because I want to be able to speak intelligently to whatever game people want to hear about in that moment. And that can very much impact the way I experience the game.
Thank you so much for submitting your mailbag questions. Steve, why don't you tell people how they can become part of our winner's circle?
Yeah. So if you'd like to support us here at GVG doing the Week in Nintendo and a bunch of other stuff, you can join our winner's circle over at patreon.com/GVGaming, or for as little as $5 a month, you get each episode of the Week in Nintendo early over at our Patreon, as well as a whole host of other benefits. So again, if you want to check it out, patreon.com/GVGaming is where you can do that.
All right, everyone. Thanks for listening to the Week in Nintendo at GVG. We'll see you next week for more Nintendo news. But for now, keep the games good and the vibes greater. See ya.
Bye.